Hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms where you'll find services, activities, information resources and so on, intended for the global MedComms community, by which I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and indeed resources for those people who want to join MedComms. You'll find lots of stuff at medcommsnetworking.com, so go and have a look. You'll also find associated websites like at NetworkPharma TV, where we store the recordings of these sorts of webinars that we're running today. You'll find more than 300 plus videos now there, so there's a lot of useful content there, so do please go and have a bit of an explore. Today I'm absolutely delighted that we've got Alex and Sarah from Within3 and Michelle from AstraZeneca, and we're going to talk basically about virtual platforms, engaging with KOLs, people in this new virtual world, different ways of going about the meetings and so on. We're going to have a presentation, and then we're going to open this up to a Q&A. So those of you in the audience, please do join in with your questions and comments and observations via one of the two chat boxes. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alex to kick us off, please. Thanks very much, Alex.
Great, thanks, Peter, and welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. As Peter indicated, we're here today to talk about this new world that we've found ourselves in after 18 months of lockdown and COVID across the world. And really what we're here today to do is to investigate really how we can engage with our key opinion leaders and what that looks like at the moment and what it's going to look like going forward as well. So I'm hoping it's going to be an interesting discussion. And as Peter indicated, we have the ability for questions to be entered into the chat, so please feel free to do so. We want to make this session as interactive as possible. And we've got an experienced panel today, so I'm hoping it's going to be a good session. So this is the agenda for the meeting today. So in a moment, I'm just going to introduce the panel. Then I'll take you through a brief technology sort of introduction, just to make sure we're all talking the same language, really, so that when we're talking about the various virtual options that are available, we're all talking about the same thing. Then we'll get into the panel discussion and questions from the audience. And then, as Peter indicated, we're going to close the session at that point. So let me quickly introduce myself. For those that don't know me, I'm Alex Monaghan. I'm Senior Director of Business Partnerships at Within3. I've been at Within3 for 18 months or so, and I started this strange working from home odyssey before the pandemic happened, which was a little bit weird, but then the rest of the world decided to join me. Prior to that, my background is 30 years in healthcare. Started off in pharma, started off carrying the bag, then into marketing, then sales management, and eventually jumped the fence into the agency side and worked predominantly in global medcoms before joining Within3. So that's enough about me. Let me quickly introduce my colleague, Sarah. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Sarah Diffen. I'm one of the members of the client success team at Within3. My background is, well, originally as a pharmacist, then moved over into the pharma world, and then into medcoms, more on the medical education side. I've seen a couple of names for people that are very familiar to me. So hello, great to see you have joined today. I joined Within3 actually during the pandemic. It was July last year. So completely onboarded onto a company remotely, virtually. I feel like I really know my colleagues. I interact with them every day. The one thing that I don't know is how tall or how short they might be. So the opportunity to meet in person is going to be great, but the likelihood of me walking straight past somebody, perhaps looking in the wrong area or the wrong sphere to see where they are. I know what they look like from here up, but that's about it. I'm also absolutely delighted to be joined by Michelle today. I'll hand over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and hi everyone. It's great to join today's panel. So my name is Michelle Marchione, and I'm part of the Oncology Patient Affairs global team at AstraZeneca, based in Cambridge in England, although Canadian, hence my Canadian accent. I started my career in the nonprofit sector. I worked for a Canadian NGO in the HIV community, which really ignited my passion for healthcare, for all things healthcare, and particularly for ensuring that patients have access to the best possible care and all the information and resources that they need in order to make the best decisions regarding their care. And from there, worked for a number of agencies, both in Canada and globally in the UK, always doing stakeholder relations communications, working closely alongside colleagues in medical communications, and then eventually made my way to AstraZeneca. So absolutely delighted to be part of today's discussion, and looking forward to hearing more.
Great, thanks, Michelle. It's great to have you on board today, so really appreciate you joining us. So, just for those that don't know who Within3 are, I just want to very quickly say a little bit about the company. So as a company, we didn't spring up during the pandemic. We've been around for 14 years or so. Prior to joining Within3, I've got to admit, I'd never heard of the company, which probably explains why we've now got a much larger marketing department than we had previously. But it's something that I wish I had known about when I was on the agency side. So Within3, basically, we only work in healthcare and pharma. We don't work in any other industries at all. We're currently working for all 20 of the top 20 pharma companies. And in fact, we're working with 39 of the top 50. We work with many of the mid-sized pharma, biotech, and also med device companies as well. And what we are basically is a software company, and we have developed an online virtual engagement platform, as I say, that is now being used very, very widely. So the platform was actually designed specifically for healthcare. Basically what that means is it's incredibly secure. Many of our clients trust it with their most valuable and confidential information. And also there are a number of built-in compliance features as well. So it's incredibly compliant for pharma as well. So in terms of where we are at this moment in time, I mean, as I say, prior to the pandemic, we've all been involved in numerous live meetings, and that probably meant live face-to-face at that point, be that small meetings like ad boards, or be it larger meetings such as congresses and those larger engagements as well. For the last 12 to 18 months, where we've been is, if it was a real-time meeting, we've probably been talking about webcasting or webinar as we're doing today. So we are all joined at the same time, although obviously not in the same location. We have people literally from all over the world today, which is great to see. So that's our options for real time. And obviously at this moment in time, people are looking at the options for live face-to-face meetings coming back again. And I think there's a great appetite for that. So everyone we talk to is now looking at how they are going to combine that live face-to-face meeting with the rest of their engagement and what that looks like. So those are our options. For real time, we have obviously live face-to-face if possible, or webcast or webinars we're doing today. And then there's a third component, and that's really what we would call an overtime or asynchronous meeting. And that's really where platforms such as Within3 fit in. And that's really where there's an online discussion, which can be over a period of days, weeks, or months even. Those are really, as I say, the three options we have available to us. So in terms of the overtime virtual meeting, as I say, the Within3 platform has been developed over a number of years, continues to be developed. We roll out new, improved versions of the platform literally on a weekly basis. But the platform itself is basically able to be accessed from any internet-enabled device. So it doesn't matter if it's a mobile phone, desktop, PC or Mac, be it an iPad or any other tablet device. So it's available 24/7, 365 days. Now, anyone who's actually used any form of social media will be very familiar with how the platform works. If you've used things like LinkedIn or Facebook, then we'll be very used to that threaded conversation approach. And that's what we're really talking about here. It's not a way just of creating polls, etc. It really is about two-way dialogue and engagement. So let's look at that. So in terms of overtime versus real-time engagement, so there are obvious differences to the two. So Within3, as I say, what we're talking about is overtime engagement. And that's where your delegates, your participants will access the platform, take part in your discussion, your advisory board, whatever it may be, at their own time. And obviously, if we're doing as we are today, where we're accessing this webcast at the same time, There are obviously some time constraints. We've got 40 minutes, and Peter's no doubt going to close me down if I take too long. So we can only obviously cram in what we can get in 40 minutes. Whereas obviously if we're engaging asynchronously in overtime, then those time constraints just don't exist. It's entirely up to me how long I take. In terms of participation, again, no, at this moment in time, I'm dominating the conversation. So I'm the only person talking and the rest of our people just listening at this moment in time. Whereas of the asynchronous overtime platform, everyone gets an equal share of voice. So again, that's a massive difference as well. And again, you have to be ready for that live meeting. So the meeting is at a specific time. So you turn up and you take part and that's it. Whereas again, over time, you can engage bite-sized chunks. If you've only got 30 minutes to spare or 5 minutes to spare, it doesn't matter. You just basically take part as and when it works for you. And again, Peter's obviously moderating our session today. Having moderated ad boards myself, and I'm sure many of you have done as well, I remember that gallop of the ad board, from getting set up on arrival through to the frantic scrabble at the end when everyone's grabbing their cases and rushing off to the airport. As a moderator, that deep sigh of relief that it had all come to an end, and hopefully I remembered some of it and was able to write it down. And again, I know Sarah and I talk about this a lot, but Sarah, with her sort of more editorial background than mine, one of the beauties of the platform is you don't have to write anything down. The platform captures it all for you. So again, a massive benefit from that point of view. And I've already sort of alluded to this, but again, this is something when we're talking to our clients, we get into this discussion about fair market value a great deal. And also, it's not much about fair market value, but it's actually about what do you get out of that investment as well. So typically, let's say we're going to have a webinar or a webcast, and we've got 10 people on it, and it's a 3-hour webinar. Basically, it's very obvious. We're paying for 30 hours of time, and the potential we've got 30 hours of input from our group here. But because it's only a 3-hour webinar, we can only get 3 hours of output from the group. So what does that mean? What it means effectively is that we're actually potentially wasting some of that time. We're wasting the time from our participants, and we're also potentially wasting some of that honorarium as well. So again, massive difference. Not saying that any of these options are right or wrong. All they are is different, and you have to decide which is the most appropriate one for your engagement needs. So in terms of the overtime platform, as I say, it is more inclusive. Everyone has the same share of voice. Everyone can participate equally. It's very considerate of people's time. It works to their schedule. One thing about the platform I haven't mentioned so far is it's also able to translate into over 100 different languages. So again, for things like patient engagement, it's perfect where patients may be more comfortable engaging in their own language. So again, that's something which you wouldn't necessarily want to do with simultaneous translation the old-fashioned way, because again, it's very costly and very technically difficult. And also there are a number of engagement tools built into the platform as well, such as co-authoring, collaboration, etc. as well. So again, there are benefits to the overtime platform that are worth considering. So this is the landscape we're in at the moment. And as I say, we've got the potential for real-time engagement coming back, which is fantastic. But also, we have our virtual engagement environment as well, be that real time, be that asynchronous. And I think that's really what we're here today to talk about, is which of these give us the best blend of engaging with our opinion leaders, with our stakeholders as we move forward in this ever-changing landscape that we find ourselves in currently. So with that, I'm going to actually hand over to Sarah. Sarah and I work very closely on some of our accounts together. And Sarah, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and experience over the last sort of 12 months as well. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Alex. So I think one of the main questions that me and my colleagues in the client success team have really been helping our clients with, but also our agency partners with, and we'll be continuing to help them with, is what virtual strategies do we use? What's the right mix of technologies to get the best outcomes? And I'm sure if we go on to the next slide, many of us have experienced this feeling before, sitting in front of the laptop, back-to-back Zoom calls or Teams calls or whichever real-time engagement you have. That real-time engagement is really important, but how do we avoid that feeling of fatigue? How do we avoid pulling this face at the end of the day or even halfway through the day? In what you've heard Alex sort of talking about, you might be thinking that it's got to be a big global engagement where you employ these virtual strategies, whether it's virtual face-to-face, overtime, or hybrid, that this really comes into its own. But what I want to share with you is a recent experience. It was a small geographical region, which you might not necessarily instantly think of employing different virtual strategies where that geographical distance isn't so much of a consideration. So on the next slide, just to point out this little geographical region is Ireland. So this was an advisory board that we were working on with a particular client. And so I've mentioned kind of thinking about the right mix of technologies and what do we do to think about that. From our point of view, understanding what needs to be communicated with our stakeholders, understanding what needs to be discussed with them, what needs to be perhaps collaborated on, and what's the best forum in which to share this information, and what's the best forum in which to have these discussions and collaborations, and where do these overlap? When do we use face-to-face? When do we use overtime? So if we move on to the next slide, for this client, it was really important to meet face-to-face, and the Within3 platform and these overtime technologies are not necessarily designed to replace that face-to-face interaction. They're very much there to enhance it, to complement it, and to really ensure that we get the maximum engagement with our key stakeholders, our opinion leaders, our patient advocates, the people who are really important to us. So we made time available to meet face-to-face. However, this was limited. So we also utilized the overtime platform. We had a short opening call where there was some data that was shared. It was important to present this data and have the context behind it and enable the advisors to ask some questions. We also did an orientation on the platform, so how to get the best out of that virtual experience as well. And I think this was a 30 or 45-minute call, so not particularly long. We were very respectful of the time that these HCPs were taking out of their clinic days in order to attend the meeting. And then we opened up the discussion on the Within3 platform, and this ran for just under 2 weeks. And it enabled people to go in and continue that discussion, to ask further questions. There was some collaboration on some case studies as well, and people could go in. Now, admittedly, they're all in the same time zone, but they could go in at times that were convenient for them. And when we analysed actually the logins at different times, we had people who were coming in the morning. That was obviously the time that they felt was really good to answer questions, others logging in middle of the day, others in the evening, and some utilising all of the time in between. So it was just really convenient for them to access that discussion when they wanted to. And then in this particular instance, it was important for us to have a wrap up. So we had a 90-minute Zoom call where we were able to consolidate some of the discussion and also talk about next steps. There were some key questions, again, that the client wanted to discuss face-to-face. So we, as we refer to it in the team, we bookended our session. So we had the opening webcast, the overtime discussion, and the closing webcast. And there's no reason why you can't mix and match that kind of combination. It might be that you need to have an opening webcast. You want to have that face-to-face time, or you might want to gather some insights on the platform or an overtime platform before you meet face-to-face. Get some of those questions out of the way that sometimes in advisory boards we spend up to the coffee break getting the clinical landscape, the lay of the land, current practices. You can utilize an overtime platform to kind of gather that information as well. So we work with our clients to really figure out when and where do we have these engagements, these discussions. Is it real time? Is it overtime? And then figure out the best combination in which to do that. And as I said, we work very closely with a number of agency partners and our clients as well to make sure that we're hitting the right mark as far as getting that combination together. Now, the results for this particular client were that there was a lot more and much more detailed feedback and discussion amongst the advisors than she had actually seen in a face-to-face meeting. It was a similar group of advisors. She had met them in person about 18 months prior to that for a different discussion. And the depth of insight she felt was really, really valuable, got so much more out of it. But having that face-to-face really made it as well. She was able to invite HCPs who historically hadn't been able to attend an in-person meeting. Now, obviously, Ireland's not a huge nation, but people could still find it challenging to travel, and that enabled her to hear everybody's voices. So she had a bigger virtual table, so to speak. And as Alex mentioned earlier, when we're on a Zoom or a real time like this, only one person can speak at a time. I know people do try and sometimes talk over each other like they do in a face-to-face meeting, but really you can only listen to one person at a time. And in that overtime, lots of people can be having a discussion at the same time. So that was just one recent example I wanted to share with everybody. We run thousands of sessions on the platform, different types of engagements, different stakeholders, different groups that we engage. And we've obviously invited Michelle in today to share some of that experience with you. And so, Michelle, we wanted to kind of get your input now. You've been waiting so patiently, maybe to start the discussion around some of the more challenging aspects of virtual engagement that you've experienced in the past year.
Thanks, Sarah, and great presentation. I was taking notes as we went along, even though I've used your platform. There's always more to do and tweaks that can be made. I think over this past year, we've all been forced to work virtually. We didn't have a choice, and the work needed to continue to get done. And I think one of the things that I found challenging is, how do I approach these engagements with stakeholders in a way that's going to get me the results that I need? How can I engage with them effectively when I'm not bringing them together in person, which was kind of the default really in the past. We'd had there, and all of us, I think, take the same sort of approach. There's a Congress happening. We know many of our stakeholders are going to be going. Let's attack something onto that and get them in a room and get them around the table and have that discussion. So how do we still have a robust, effective conversation with them and get what we need in a virtual environment? And all of the things that you talked about regarding, inclusivity, that participation, all of those challenges were things that we thought about and we faced. And we have used Within3 this year. We've used other platforms as well. We've used Zoom, we've used Teams, we've used lots of things. But Within3 certainly provided us with that opportunity to have a robust discussion with various groups of stakeholders. I don't work that much with KOLs in my role, but there's similarities regardless of the stakeholder to be able to get their feedback and in an effective way. I think, sorry, just one more reflection as I'm speaking. One of the other challenges is because everybody's at home, it means we're working across time zones. When we're not getting everybody together in a room, we have to factor in take time zones into consideration, and there's not one time zone that works for everybody. I've tried to find one because I have colleagues in the US, I've got colleagues in Asia Pacific, and stakeholders everywhere. But yeah, again, being able to work in overtime helps overcome that. People can just log in when they need to and can participate that way.
I think one of the things that surprised us and has surprised some of our clients is the way that people have adapted to this. We do have, every so often there'll be somebody who has this perception that it's going to be difficult and engaging virtually is going to be difficult. And we take a lot of time to try and overcome that and to hold people's hands and give them best practice advice on how to engage virtually. But Michelle, what surprises did you have as far as the virtual engagements that you had over the past year?
Surprises, gosh. I was a bit nervous about, so I held Zoom meetings. I would have to say I started with kind of the Zoom Teams meetings approaches and had reasonable success depending on what it was I was after. then I heard about this platform and thought, okay, this is something maybe I want to try, because I was in a situation where I did have stakeholders around the world and was trying to think, how do I engage them effectively, without having to hold multiple meetings, many conversations. And I was worried about how much people would participate, because I think even though only one of us can speak at a time when we're on a video platform, speaking can be less cumbersome, I think, sometimes than typing, right? I feel like typing sometimes can be a barrier, but actually what I found was, and I'll share an example, I held an advisory board meeting with patients to understand their experiences. So I did it on Within3, and I found that people were really generous with their time. The typing of their experiences didn't seem to be a barrier at all. In fact, we got so many insights from them, really robust responses. I think people spent a lot of time. We got way more from them in that sort of situation where they could take the time that they wanted and have a platform to speak for as long as they wanted without any interruptions than we would have if we tried to do it in Zoom, or even if we were around the table live, face-to-face in a meeting. And one of the things that surprised me, and I really liked this, was that the stakeholders built on each other's responses. So just like if you're on an online forum and somebody posts a question, somebody else posts a response, then you might get somebody, commenting on a response, or building on somebody's response, or asking another question that leads to something else, and it sort of gets bigger and bigger and takes on a life of its own. We started to see that in our online advisory board meeting, and that was amazing to see. People were commenting on other people's responses, offering words of advice or kind of support, and it just grew and grew and grew. And we did it across the course of a week. We had 12 participants and over 250 comments across the week. It was just incredible. So I was really surprised at the high level of engagement. Very, very pleased to see that, and very happy with the outcome.
Fantastic. And any kind of key learnings you want to share with the group? I'm sure people are just kind of thinking, what did you take away from it? What perhaps would you do again? What perhaps wouldn't you do again?
I think having an active moderator is really important. I think you touched upon this in your slides. Making the time. So because there was so much engagement, I was one of the moderators, and I had to make sure I went in at least once a day, and I learned very quickly, actually multiple times a day was better, to keep up with the conversation. Otherwise, I found I got lost. I didn't quite know how to navigate or where to start, because there was so much to engage with, and I didn't want to miss anything or miss anyone. So making that time and having somebody who can go in and acknowledge people's responses, ask probing questions, all of that really helps, particularly at the beginning. If things are off to a slow start, having somebody who can go in and ask questions and get things going, just like if you're in a Zoom meeting or you're in a meeting around the table, you want somebody facilitating and getting things going, so that energy and momentum sort of builds. That was certainly a learning for us.
Great. I was going to say, I've seen a question come in, and I've just, Michelle will give you a break momentarily. But talking about the types of tools that you can integrate with the platform, and other options for pollings and breakout rooms and that kind of thing. So in the overtime discussion, you can set up a room where you've got everybody participating in discussion. And then you can also set up, I guess, sub rooms of that, or breakout rooms, so you can still continue that asynchronous discussion in smaller groups. So if there were topics you wanted to focus on, and you had perhaps a mix of, I know we're doing one at the moment with oncologists and urologists, and there are questions that we want them both to answer, but there are questions we want each group to answer individually and have discussion around that. So we've created some breakout rooms there. That's the overtime part of that. As far as the kind of real time, we are able to integrate the platform with our Zoom or Teams or whichever real-time software we're using. So in the example I shared earlier, we have the webcast details available on the platform. People can join via the platform, or they can join via their calendar invitation, whatever's easiest for them to do. So yes, we can connect all of those up together as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I'm conscious of time as well, and we've talked a little bit about the last sort of 12 to 18 months. I think now, obviously, and I don't know where you are in the planning process at the moment, Michelle, but I know many of the clients at the moment are sort of deep in the 2022 planning at the moment. I think that raises the question really, in terms of the future of engagement and what that looks like. So I don't know what thoughts you have about that.
Gosh, I think virtual is here to stay. Not to say that we won't ever meet face to face again. I think we absolutely will. And I know I myself and all of my stakeholders really miss that. And we all look forward to the days when we can come back together again. But I think those face to face meetings will happen less frequently. I think they're no longer the default. I think the default, and the question we'll be asking ourselves and our internal stakeholders will be asking us is, could we do this virtually? Because it is more cost efficient, more cost effective. It's efficient in so many ways. So can we do this? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Is a virtual meeting platform or asynchronous platform like this, or is there a solution that we can use to do it virtually? And if not, do we need to get together? And if we get together, how do we do that in a very effective way? So I think there's going to be room for everybody now, all these kind of opportunities. And yeah, that face-to-face meeting will happen a lot less frequently. I think it's going to be, and Sarah, I think you talked about kind of hybrid, and you shared some examples of how clients have used Within3 and sort of bookended it, I think was the term you used, with some sort of engagement on a webcast or something. And that's really important. I mean, you don't want to go into onto these platforms cold. You need to make sure you've got relationships with the people that you're going to be engaging with, or have some sort of pre-meeting or something with them to get the most engagement. Yeah, and certainly looking ahead, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you, I will always be asking the question, what is the right approach for the problem that we're trying to solve, this engagement that we want to have going forward.
Great, thanks, Michelle. And I think you're absolutely right. There is no one answer, but there's just different questions. And I think pre-COVID, the Within3 platform was being used prior to live meetings or post-live meetings. So I think we'll also see that as well. If you're going to have a live face-to-face engagement, why not get the most out of that time by getting some of the pre-work out of the way? Then when you get that ad board together, you actually get the most out of that limited amount of time. It makes the meeting much more effective rather than starting from scratch, as it were. So I think, that's all really valuable thoughts and insights. And I think, the last question, I think, is probably, if you were going to give someone advice who hadn't used the platform before, what would you say to them in terms of what are your key learnings in terms of the journey you've been on so far?
Yeah. The change journey. I felt really nervous when I used the platform for the first time. You put a lot of faith in things when you get on there, and I think it's important. I mean, your team has been great about providing loads of support, training, walking us through. So I felt comfortable, navigating. Like with any sort of new tool, it's great to have practice. You can do a practice session or pilot it in a safe space just with your own internal team before you go live. To make sure you know how to navigate. Just like if you're holding a big event at a live venue, you're not going to walk into that venue for the first time on the day of your mass event. You're going to go and check it out and make sure the table is set and it's all ready to go. The technology works. So it's the same kind of thing. Just test it out and make sure that you're comfortable and you know how to navigate it. And that's all really. I mean, it's easy. I think it's once you've done it once, it becomes really easy to navigate and use. I really love the platform personally. I've used it now a couple of times with various groups of stakeholders, including in a situation where you talked about where actually have a steering committee where we meet on a monthly basis, but then in between all of our touch points are on the platform, and we collaborate on materials and they provide feedback on things. So that's how we stay in touch on an ongoing basis. So there's lots of different ways that it can be used as well. Excellent.
Sarah, I pose you the same question, because obviously with your background in agency as well, now, if you had had access to this back then, what would you say to people now?
Well, I do remember one of the advisory board, a steering committee that we were doing some years ago, was actually using the platform in between those steering committees. So I didn't know much about it, but I thought that's an interesting concept. As far as, you know, advice I'd give out, I think it's really thinking about what are the key things you need to ask your group, and how can you ask them, being respectful of their time, being respectful of the fact that sometimes that face-to-face interaction is the best way to get that information. Or do you want more in-depth insights, people to reflect and think about their responses, or do you want a combination of that? I think to be honest, asking yourself a lot of questions. What does success look like? What do I want to come out of this with? And then kind of working back from there. Approaching it in the same way that you would any other engagement. So approaching a virtual engagement, approaching an in-person engagement. Michelle, you made a great point about you don't rock up to the ballroom in a hotel and expecting the stage and everything to be ready for your symposium to start, or your big scientific exchange. You know, there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. And it's approaching it in a similar way. You're just using a different venue for your discussion rather than a live venue using a virtual one. But the thought process, the questions, the way that you approach it is very, very similar. So don't be afraid of it, I think, is probably the piece of advice that I would give.
And there's a question in the Q&A, and that's asking about assessing return on the investment. So Michelle, I mean, as someone who's actually spent your own budget on the platform, how would you assess the ROI on what you've done?
So one of the things that I like about the platform is you can get like a subscription for a year. You don't have to pay for it one-off. Depending on how you're using it, we've as a team invested in it, and we use it all the time. So I think the ROI is definitely there. I think it's really good value for money. It might look a little bit different if you're using it as a one-off, but if you're on agency side, I mean, look ahead to, what's coming for your clients for the year. Is this something that, you could invest in as an agency, just like you would get a subscription to, I don't know, other services, social media listening tools, or whatever it is that you're using. And it might be, more cost effective to do it that way. But certainly, if you think about the cost of bringing people together in a live meeting, it's a no-brainer. And compare it to other types of online platforms, I think there's definitely value in taking this kind of approach.
Great. No, thanks, Michelle. Peter, I'm conscious that we're marching towards the time, so I think it's probably a good time for us to probably open up to the wider audience and see what they are. But I'd just like to quickly put one slide on the screen for those people who would be interested. Within3 run a virtual engagement partner program. So obviously we don't generate content, we don't do all of the stuff that you guys in the agency do. So we work with you. So if anyone is interested, you'll see on the screen there is a link to our website, which you can take a look at, get more information. Angela Lambrosi heads up the program. She's actually on this call at the moment. So you can reach out to Angela. She'll give you more information and sign up. Many agencies are already part of our VEP program, and there are benefits to doing so. So I would suggest that if you are interested, that would be a good next step for everyone. So Peter, I think probably an opportune time to hand back to you, sir.
Okay, thanks, guys. It's very interesting listening to you talking, and we have only got a couple of minutes left. But if anyone in the audience is wanting to throw some questions at us, please do. You've got your chat box and your Q&A box, so do ping us some questions or thoughts from your point of view, and we'll build that in. But I just find it fascinating actually listening to you, and I found myself just thinking, you know, some of what you're talking about with respect, I mean, you'd have been talking about, or Within3 would have been talking about 5 years ago, probably 10 years ago, to be honest. You know, some of us have been talking about stuff like this for so long, and it was, and there was a certain amount happening, but it was hard work to get people to do stuff. And what's happened in the last 18 months is absolutely fascinating in terms of, and maybe it's just inevitable, you know, you're told you can't do that, you've got to do something else, and you embrace what's actually been sitting there for quite a long time. But the language that's being used, I find fascinating, because it's become much more, just listening to you talk, I mean, there's language that's now being used, which we wouldn't have used 5 years ago. And maybe that's why we couldn't persuade people to do more quickly. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that. But the language is absolutely fascinating. You know, but blindingly obvious that this is good stuff. Yeah. What there's a number of things I'm very interested in though. One of the questions I think came up earlier on, and I'm going on my own experience here. You know, we're all saying yes to everything now. We're all saying yes to all sorts of meetings and stuff. We don't have to move. It's so easy for us. You were saying about all the convenience, but then I'm now in 5 different meetings at the same time. And yes, I can asynchronously join in the conversation, but do I remember to go back, and do I really join in? What incentives? I mean, I've been in various situations where I've tried to persuade people to do things like that. Just a comment briefly, I guess we have to be brief, about incentivizing people to join in that period. And there was a question earlier on about honorariums and so on. You know, how much is that tied, frankly, to honorariums, and how complicated is it to work out an honorarium structure? So you can see where I'm going, and Alex, just say a few words on that sort of front, and maybe Michelle,
absolutely.
Point of view.
So let me pick up on the engagement part first. I mean, that's one of the things that Sarah and the team will report back to clients at the end. We basically have a results report at the end of every session with our clients, and we go through all of those engagement metrics, so we can actually see, you know, how engaged people are on the platform, how much time they spend on the platform, not just the number of questions they answer, but also the other responses as well. So that conversation and how that, you know, how really deep that conversation has become. So we can really see that, and we can also see when they log into the platform, etc. From an honorarium point of view, it's really interesting. And again, no, I would say that no, there's no simple formula. It really does depend, and it's probably very, very similar to the way that the fair market value has been worked out in the past for attendance. Now, if someone's going to an ad board, and the ad board is going to be 8 hours, and you've got travel time and pre-reads, etc., it's the same thing. So how much time do you expect people to spend on the platform? How many questions are there? Are there any pre-reads? Are there any video calls or live meetings that they need to be engaged with? And they build the honorarium exactly the same way. And again, Michelle, no, you're probably best to comment on this because you're actually doing it for real rather than just talking about it. So when you're looking at honorarium, how would you do that?
Yeah, that's exactly the approach that we would take. And then I think the key thing is being really transparent with the participants in advance about how many hours we expect them to be on there. I think this is less of a concern with doctors whose time is stretched and they're not going to spend, frankly, I mean, generally speaking, I don't think they're going to spend any extra time on there. I think they're going to go in, do what they need to do and leave because they've got patients that they need to treat and they've got, 100 other things. I've been working a lot with patients on the platform, and this is different because patients have different demands on their time. This is their lived experience that we're asking them potentially to comment on. They could talk about it all day, really. And so, but we want to be mindful of their time and respectful of that. And so being really, taking the time to think through, okay, what are we asking of them? Who are the participants? How much time do we think they're going to need to spend on the platform responding? If it's a patient, they're probably going to spend some time reflecting outside the platform on the questions that we ask and then come in and spend some time on the platform responding. So thinking about all these things, coming up with a number that we think is reasonable. Of course, we work really closely with our internal compliance teams to make sure that we're, within the boundaries of what would be considered acceptable. And then very clearly, transparently communicating that to participants so that they know what's expected of them, and they can monitor their time too. And they can decide, they may decide to spend more time. They may decide to spend less than, what's been allocated to them. But that way everybody has alignment on expectations.
Brilliant.
Again, I'm just drawing on my experience here, but I mean, it does occur to me, or seem to me, that you're going to have maybe a couple of situations. I mean, the situation, which is very often the case in this sort of discussion forum type situation, where nobody says anything, and that can be very, very frustrating. It becomes a self-fulfilling thing, because then people don't come and join in because there's nothing happening. Or the other situation where I come in, and I think you touched on this, Michelle, as a moderator, you come in and you go, oh my goodness, there's loads of comments, and you get sucked in, and actually you spend the entire day being involved in this sort of like threaded conversation and going off and different. And we've all experienced this in different ways. I mean, it's quite difficult to manage that. I do think the difference perhaps between patients and HCPs would be really interesting. And I don't know whether you've got, Sarah, whether you've got an overall comment. I mean, I can imagine patients really embracing something like this, whatever the platform, but this opportunity to chat. Whereas the HCPs have got their patients or whatever. Do you see any differences there, or do you just fundamentally go, this works for everybody sort of thing? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Michelle's kind of alluded to, your patients are having the opportunity to be heard and to share their experience. And for some, that is incredibly important for them. So they are providing a lot of feedback on the platform. With the level of engagement with our HCPs, we see an incredible level of engagement. I think also this comes back to the planning as well. Are we asking the right questions? I'm sure we've all been to advisory boards where the energy in the room and the responses were low because the topic wasn't necessarily pitched right, or the questions weren't there, and you've got a moderator really pivoting to try and get those questions into an area that's going to prompt that discussion. The moderator role in a face-to-face meeting obviously is really important. If you've got a really unengaged, dull moderator at the front of the room, you're going to get responses, but you're only going to get those responses. Same in a virtual venue, virtual forum. If you've got a moderator who's not acknowledging or appears to be listening to what people are saying, people can feel a bit disconcerted. They don't feel as if they're being listened to. So there was another question about training for HCPs and moderators. That's something that we do a lot of. We want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with the virtual environment, how they interact, how they get the best out of that experience. So we provide moderator training, we provide advisor training or participant training, but also training for our clients, training for our agencies as well, so that when you're going into a virtual session, you're planning it like you would a face-to-face meeting, with success in mind and the outcomes in mind, and you put together the right questions and the right documents to collaborate, and you approach it in a way that's going to help you achieve your objectives.
I'm gonna wrap this up because we are a little bit over time, and I think it's important to keep our 10 minutes at the end for the audience who are here today, so that we can just sort of finish in a nicely relaxed way. But absolutely fascinating. As always, I'm sitting here thinking about the practicalities, and until you do something like this, I think you don't. It can seem more complicated than it is, but also until you do something like this, you don't see some of the real practical sort of challenges of this sort of activity. So I suppose my encouragement is always just people should be embracing this and doing more of it and learning and so on. It'd be interesting maybe over the coming months to talk more about this. But for today and for this session, this record session, I'm gonna wrap it up if that's okay, guys. I'm gonna say a huge thank you to you for doing that, for being here. I'm going to say on your behalf that you're happy. I know you are, for people to reach out to you via LinkedIn is the easy way. So please do, anyone watching this, reach out. If anyone's interested in what we're doing at MedComms Networking, then obviously medcommsnetworking.com, you'll find details of everything we are planning, and links back to other stuff we've done. And NetworkPharma TV is the resource where you can go and watch all the videos. So I'm going to say thank you very much today. We're all going to give you a little wave while I shut off the recording, and wish you all the best. So bye bye, and thank you very much. Bye.